Today I will show you what is the typical location of columns. You can imagine if the building without columns, the building will be fire like this one. Okay, I will summarize different types of use and then tell you what is the typical dimension of the columns and where they are. For the first one, we will see many residential buildings. The live load is typically 2 kPa and the store height is about 3 meters. Normally, you can imagine the column spacing is within 10 meters. Is very common for reinforced concrete. And for the wall, we also can imagine or assume this is around 10 meters. This is a common term you need to remember. And for example, for the beams, we normally around 2 to 3 meters we have a beam, and then for the slab, normally the normal thickness is 150 mm. This is another form of the residential building. You can take a look of the dimension. Normally you can see between the wall within 10 meters. That means if you want to make your core wall location and the core wall or columns, you can imagine just put 10 meters, every 10 meters with a columns. It is good enough to estimate and assume the location of the vertical elements. Another thing is, for the residential building, you also need to remember some common feature nowadays in Hong Kong. For example, normally the architect like the cladding. They don't like just use the painting. For the cladding, they can have a different form and different shape, and the balustrade is for the people from falling down to the floor, and the fabric is another form of the roof structure provided. And for the green wall or green feature, you can see this is a typical details. You need to remember there's a water membranes above. This is a soil. Remember, every green features should have properly designed to ensure the loading should not be any problems. Okay. And some other features for the Hong Kong buildings, there's many typical precast structure for environmental friendly, and to show you the stone claddings and the GRC to make another special old style features. This is for the environmental friendly elements. For the sunshade features, and another thing is so-called the sunken slab to prevent the water leakage. Another feature is so-called the utility platform. Remember, you also need to check whether we have provide sufficient space for the utility or air conditioner. For another forms of building or another use of building, for example, you can take a look of the so-called super tall building. Normally, you can see the column spacing should be larger than 10 meters. And for the residential building or hotel building, you can see sometimes you also can imagine or try to think about have assumption as 10 meter width. Okay, this is show you one of the example in Hong Kong. For the another type of hotel use, normally the structural element will be occupied or will be located between 2 guest rooms or between 3 or 1 guest room. It can easily provide the location easily to suit the actual layout. This is show you some of the typical grid line of 2 rooms. And for example, if there's 3 rooms in here, you can imagine or take a look of this one. It's also about 10 meter grid. For the school, this is another form of the use, but normally for reinforced concrete, the column spacing is around 10 meters. That means for around 10 meters, you can imagine up to school is also suitable. For the swimming pool, remember the column should be below the swimming pool. You never see any columns in the middle of the swimming pool. Okay, otherwise the swimmer cannot be swim. Before that, you need to understand that this is a typical grid line for the 25 meter, and the 15 meter is a standard dimension of the typical swimming pool. Normally, it's about 2 meter depth. Okay, it's a very standard. If you want to design a standard swimming pool, you need to remember this is a typical dimension. That means normally you need to put the column outside the swimming pool. That means at least a 25 with 9 or 15 meters with 9. This is another summary of the things I want to say. Is you can take a look of this one. It's not easy to understand. If you assume 10 meter, you can good enough to design these 5 forms of buildings. And then the size depends on what is the loading. The heavier you are, the more the depth will be higher. For another steel structure or long span structure, in Hong Kong we normally use the steel elements because concrete is too heavy and it's not economical if you design concrete buildings. That's why try to use the steel building. That's why if you design the long span building, normally they will put on the roof, on the top, near the top of the buildings. You imagine the roof loading is less. That's why you can design a very slim structures and can have a long span more than 72 meters for the exhibition center in Hong Kong Airport. Another type is a footbridge. I think normally the people think about is 30 meters is so-called minimums, and then you can design much more higher because you can imagine the steel truss occupy the full height of the steel bridge, and this is very good for structure. And this is also the summaries of the steel structure. That means, for example, if you design the roof, you can imagine to just put columns up to 70 meters away, and this is sufficient to take the loading for roof only. But for example, for the office, you can imagine, you can assume it's 15 meters. For the beach, assume 30 meters. That means if you assume there's a low column, it is not impossible at this moment. Thank you.